Hi there, welcome. This is the Kelly's Astrology podcast, where you can find insight, guidance, and understanding through astrology. I'm Kelly, and I'll be your host. Hey there, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Kelly's Astrology podcast. There are a lot of aspects happening as we head into this third week of January, the week starting January 18. But there's one aspect in particular that caught my eye, and that's what I'm going to explore for you today. And that is the Venus conjunct Saturn in Pisces aspect. Now, this is actually going to be an aspect that we will have a total of 3 times in the coming months, and that's thanks to Venus's upcoming retrograde. So I want to talk a little bit about that. And then there are 2 very famous, very well-known creative people that I want to mention briefly who were born with this exact aspect. Before I do, I want to let you know that I share detailed weekly videos in my astrology guide membership. So if you'd like even more tips on timing and astro insights on the astrology of the week ahead, I'd invite you to join the community over at kellysastrology.com. Inside the membership, you get exclusive info that I only share with members, plus access to quarterly member-only Q&As. Membership also means you get worksheets each month to help you time your life with astrology. So pop over to kellysastrology.com to find out more or to join us. Once you come to the homepage, just scroll down to the middle third and you'll see the membership page that has all the options. Just click there and it'll tell you everything you want to know. So hopefully I'll see you inside the membership soon. Okay, so back to this week's Venus conjunct Saturn aspect. Now, even though I'm talking about this aspect in the context of the astrology of the week as like a transiting astro weather influence, you're probably going to find this info and these insights really useful if you have Venus conjunct Saturn in your birth chart. It will probably, some of these ideas will also apply if you have Venus square Saturn or Venus opposite Saturn. So any of those really strong Venus-Saturn aspect combinations, a lot of the themes I'm talking about today will be relevant for you. Because even though this is a kind of an astro weather forecast type podcast, some of you will have this aspect in your birth chart. And even though many of us are dealing with Venus conjunct Saturn themes right now, around January, 18, some of you are working with these themes as lifelong topics. Okay, so to come back to right now, the first Venus conjunct Saturn aspect is happening on Saturday, January 18, could be Sunday, January 19, depending on where you are. And it's Venus conjunct Saturn at 16 Pisces. So just to give you the dates and details as we're beginning. So that's our first Venus-Saturn conjunction. The second will be on April 8th, and Venus and Saturn will now be together at 25 Pisces. The third and final Venus conjunct Saturn aspect will be about April 25th, and Venus and Saturn will be together at around 27 Pisces. So even though the info I'm talking about is relevant, as we get through this third weekend of January, this Venus-Saturn aspect and these themes connected to it are going to be part of a pattern that is just beginning and that we're all going to come back to in April. So some of what comes up for you around this Venus-Saturn conjunction, January 18 or 19, might speak to topics or experiences that you don't fully kind of figure out or come to a place of resolution around until we get to those second and third aspects in April. So in some ways, this weekend is like a preview of some important themes that we'll be kind of exploring and expressing and living out both at the start and at the end of April. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about some of the keywords or concepts for Venus conjunct Saturn. So straight away, we have this idea of duty before pleasure. And that can mean that there are delays with enjoyment, that we have to do the work first, and then we get to the fun stuff. Venus is, of course, very strongly placed by sign. She's exalted in Pisces, but Saturn is such a big and important planet that Venus is going to have to kind of meet some of Saturn's expectations before she gets to do what she really wants. So here with Venus conjunct Saturn, we're having to think about honoring our commitment, keeping our promises, the effort or the time required to show the care and affection to our loved ones. Of course, one of Venus's main significations is around relationships. And so having a Venus conjunct Saturn can bring a lot of realizations about relationships, and it can bring clarity around commitment. So this can be about seeing someone for who they really are. We are not wearing rose-colored glasses when Saturn is in the mix. We are seeing the essence, the truth, the kind of the core of who or what a relationship is. Now, some of us are going to see how solid and reliable the people in our lives are. And some of us are going to be seeing that there is letdown or disappointment with certain people or in certain kinds of partnerships. Now, I know many of you will be immediately thinking Venus, love, romance, but it is about relationships. So any of those important relationships in your life, close business and professional partnerships. Sometimes that even includes our close client relationships, close family relationships, close friendships. So Venus conjunct Saturn might be bringing you a little bit of a reality check or clarity around the dynamics of a close friendship, a family relationship, or even a professional partnership, in addition to those love life or romantic relationships as well. So when we get this clarity about what's really happening, we really see how each person in the relationship is upholding the agreements that the relationship is founded upon. Now, sometimes those agreements are really explicit. You know, if you are in a committed romantic relationship, you might have clear guidelines about who is responsible for what, or what being in this relationship with this person means, for instance. And if you don't have that clarity, because sometimes we're in relationships with people where there isn't a clearly defined kind of contract or set of guidelines. Maybe, you know, there's a friendship that you have where there's sort of a type of pattern that usually happens within the connection, but you've never explicitly discussed it. Maybe there's a family relationship that you have got kind of long established ways of being together. Now, with Venus conjunct Saturn, we start to see about those long established relationship habits. We see how they're working for us. And sometimes we see what they're costing us or what they are kind of preventing happening. So this idea about clarity, about commitment and connection, we see what's working and what's not. And perhaps we want to renegotiate or restructure when there are places that we're getting really clear. Like if you're really honest with yourself, I would like this person to show up for me in this way, and that's not happening. So how are you going to negotiate that? How are you going to discuss it? How are you going to try to restructure to make that a thing? And it may be that the reality check, the truth that you're telling yourself is, I'm actually not there for this person in the way that I want to be or the way that they deserve me to be. So it can kind of go either way. And so with Venus conjunct Saturn, there's a lot of thought about long-term relationship plans, goals for the future, whether that's with a friend or a family member, a coworker, a romantic partner. We're really thinking about how do we make this connection with this person sustainable over time? What would we want to tweak, change, improve? What might we want to drop or stop so that it can be a really nourishing relationship in an ongoing way? Now, so there's a lot of kind of realizations, clarity, and probably some restructuring for all of us in at least one important relationship under this Venus conjunct Saturn aspect. But Venus-Saturn aspects also bring up something really tender, really personal, and a little bit vulnerable. And that is topics about self-worth. How much do we really feel that we deserve love, kindness, respect, reliability, etc.? And so part of this Venus-Saturn aspect pattern, which is mid-January, but also early April and then late April, is kind of exploring how is my self-worth influencing my relationship experiences? Can I bring more self-love or self-acceptance into the mix? And can I bring more self-acceptance for the way you are, what you have capacity for, what you don't have capacity for? Sometimes we're in those really kind of important, pivotal, but kind of tender relationship spots with people where something is being asked of us and we may not have the capacity for it. And how do we work through that? But the key with this Venus, Saturn, and self-worth is that it really is, it can indicate the potential for some healing, for some repair, for some reconnection, perhaps first with self before we bring that into the space with others. But the idea here of working through any old patterning that might be about having to earn love or having to work for affection. And that is a real Venus Saturn thing. It's like you only get that love if you do the thing. This is sort of conditional versus unconditional. And many of us do have, explicit agreements. If you are in a co-parenting partnership with a partner or an ex-partner, sometimes there's really explicit things like you have to grab the kids on this day and you have to get the groceries on this day or what have you. But the key is that ideally, we're all contributing in ways that seem reasonable for each of our own circumstances. And so when we get into this self-worth piece, it's like, can we get those really functional, sometimes it's rituals or routines into the relationship just because it's going to be good for the relationship to have them, not because somebody owes somebody else. And that, you can imagine this is just like scratching the tip of the iceberg about the self-worth, self-love, self-acceptance space. But I bring it up because it's something I see so often with Venus-Saturn aspects. So going further on this concept, we might also be thinking about taking responsibility for our own enjoyment, for making time for the connection or the things that really nourish us, that feel good for us, making sure we have time and space for relaxation and leisure, that we're not just a working output productivity machine, that we acknowledge that we're a human, that we have layers, that we have emotions, and that we're going to need time to recharge, rest, and restore our energy and our emotion. So if you've been in a very productive, hardworking space, this Venus-Saturn aspect might show you the consequences of not having enough Venus in your life, not enough sweetness, enjoyment, delight, etc. Because Saturn is a planet about maturity and wisdom, we are learning some great insight, some great knowledge about relationships, how to show up for the people that matter to us, but also how and where to set limits and boundaries in relationships to keep ourselves safe and to make sure that we don't start to build resentment. Venus conjunct Saturn can highlight that need to balance work with leisure or downtime. So making sure that we recognize or realize why, or the role, I should say, that joy and sweetness and pleasure play in our life. And we might have to deal with, as I said, that cost of not resting, of not having fun. So in this Venus conjunct Saturn aspect, we're probably looking at some really important decisions in our relationships. We're clarifying our ongoing commitment, or we're restructuring our agreements of how we are relating and being with other people. So we're sort of clarifying the duties, the roles, the rituals in our most important relationships, kind of like the rules for playing together, if you like, the rules for us being friends or the rules for us working together. So the biggest key under this Venus-Saturn aspect is, if you're not sure, ask. That's a really mature Saturn thing to do. Like, I'm not sure if in this instance or around these circumstances, we should talk before. Is it better to plan? Sometimes you don't have to solve the problem with the Venus-Saturn aspect, but it's sometimes good to understand or to just name and express the things that you're not sure about to see if you can work together to create that clarity. Now, I've talked about this Venus-Saturn aspect and the dates it's happening: January 18, April 8, April 25th. You could expect to experience this Venus-Saturn vibe and these themes for a couple of days before and after each date. I also think this Venus-Saturn conjunction, particularly because Venus is exalted in Pisces as she's making these aspects to Saturn. So there is some good here to access. There is inspiration or creativity, there's compassion, there's soulful connection, there is spiritual practice, there is artistic and creative skill to bring forward. So being really diligent, being really responsible is definitely going to have payoffs. But I think it also speaks to a love of solitude or a craving for kind of peaceful settings, maybe wanting aloneness to spark creative inspiration, maybe being willing to work within limits or schedules to support regular artistic or creative practice. So these are all other ways this Venus-Saturn in Pisces piece can come up. So there's a lot of themes and keywords and concepts there. I feel like, this is one of those aspects I spend a lot of time talking about with clients in session and with students in class. So I could talk about Venus conjunct Saturn aspects for days, but hopefully that has given you a bit of a feel for the vibe and some keywords and concepts to play around with. To kind of further expand or help with your understanding of this, I'm going to share two creative people who have Venus conjunct Saturn in Pisces in their birth chart. So I just did a quick search in Solidify. This is by no means a comprehensive or exhaustive list of everybody who has this, but these are two people who are very well known and whose names you will, immediately recognize, maybe one more so than the other, but very interesting timing on the one that may not be as well known. So let's get into it. What I also want to say is that maybe just as a little bit of a heads up, that one of these examples I'm going to mention is going to lead to talking about some sensitive subjects like mental health, depression. I'm not necessarily going to talk about that, but as soon as I say the person, you're immediately going to spark on some of these topics. So if you're feeling a little fragile or you would rather not hear anything along these lines, feel free to pause or end your listening here. Okay. So for those of you who stayed with me, the first person is musician Kurt Cobain. So straight away, you know why we just needed to let people know what was coming. The other person is photojournalist Lee Miller. So that's a female photojournalist who was very active through World War II. So we'll talk about her in a minute. So let's talk about Kurt Cobain and his role in the band Nirvana. And so this was a huge kind of band, and Cobain, they made a huge contribution to the grunge music space, which at the time was kind of an emerging style of music. And that has really led to this kind of musical legacy that Kurt Cobain and his band Nirvana created that continues to influence artists today, more than 30 years after his death. Now, Kurt Cobain had Venus conjunct Saturn in Pisces, but remember that he had other planets in Pisces too. He was a Pisces, so Sun was in Pisces, but even more importantly, he had Mercury in Pisces. And he was really kind of known for his lyrics, the way that he spoke to some the really dark feelings or unhappy subject matter. And his lyrics kind of spoke to pain that he couldn't express. He grew up in a home where he couldn't give voice to all of these feelings, but his ability to kind of put his pain through his lyrics into song really touched the hearts of many people, of many young people who were grappling with a variety of similar things to what he was speaking to. So that kind of more melancholic piece was, maybe melancholic's not quite the right word, but we're getting into some of the depression and how the creativity was an outlet for what he was feeling that he really couldn't handle in himself. And of course, Cobain died by suicide after a relatively short musical career. But what's interesting is how significant his legacy has been, even though he just had, a relatively short time that he was creating. So let's talk about Lee Miller now for a moment. So a little bit of a different story. She had Venus conjunct Saturn in Pisces, but she was a Taurus and she had Mercury in Aries. So even though Cobain and Miller share that Venus-Saturn conjunction, for Cobain, it's part of a big stellium of planets in Pisces, whereas for Miller, it's a very specific kind of thing that is contrasted with other placements in her chart. Now, that said, she had to fight her way into being a female photojournalist during World War II because it was not done that women were sent to the front lines, even in a non-combat kind of role. But she fought for that and she was able to go. And some of her images, incredibly haunting, kind of juxtaposing the beauty of nature and the environment with the horrors of war. And so part of her work was taking these very evocative photographs that really spoke to some of the difficult truths of what was happening there with World War II. Now, she also helped to develop some new techniques and styles in the photographic industry. Now, after the war, she continued to take photos, and her work focused on images of women at work, especially women at work in hospitals. And so there's some really interesting kind of themes that I just think with Lee Miller, especially. She was a Libra rising chart, I believe. So this Venus Saturn in Pisces conjunction sits in her sixth house, which is really interesting when you think of some of the images that she was taking. So obviously, again, not a detailed exploration of Cobain or Miller, but just to kind of flag, these people express this Venus-Saturn Pisces conjunction energy. There are other parts of their chart, absolutely, but a conjunction like this is going to be pretty pivotal and influential in anyone's chart if you were to have it. And so what do these two people have in common? They both made really important artistic contributions in their field, and they both left substantial legacies that influenced generations of people to come in their field, in their industries. And so, inspired by these individuals and these ideas of developments or even the creation of legacy, which are part of this Venus Saturn in Pisces aspect, I wonder if this might kind of move you to consider for yourself what new expression of what you love or create can you help bring into being? In the way that Cobain's music kind of led to this kind of newer, different style of musicality, and the way that Miller really opened up work for women in the photographic industry, as well as she was known for having this kind of surrealistic quality to her photos. So how could you be inspired by their legacies to really pour something of yourself into creating more of what you love, if you like? So over these next few months, not just in January, but also in April, when we have these subsequent Venus-Saturn aspects, how could you put your energy, your time, your effort into offerings or relationships that might contribute to being part of your own legacy? So there's a few ideas I wanted to leave you with as we've taken a little bit of a journey today into the Venus-Saturn in Pisces space. Thanks so much for joining me for that. If you would like even more on the many astro aspects happening this week, I do hope to see you inside the membership. I will see you all again next week for even more astro. Until then, everyone, take care.